Hello,
Hi, Joan.
welcome. Welcome to Backstory with Joan Goldstein. I'm Joan Goldstein. My guest today is a very, very important man to our community, and he is Councilman David Cohen. And he has been councilman, below these 40 years, correct?
Yes.
And he's very active in so many issues that affect our own lives and our own community. And we're going to talk about that today, right, David? Okay. So one of the issues that you raised that you've been looking into and working on is on affordable housing and redevelopment. And explain what were your concerns about affordable housing in Princeton, and what did you think needed to happen?
Well, so I've been involved with the affordable housing issue since the end of my first year on council, when I joined the affordable housing negotiating team that was working with the Fair Share Housing Center to help both determine what our obligation would be and also how and where we would finance and build these affordable units. And it was a real challenge because, for one thing, we just have a very large obligation, quite a bit larger than what we were initially anticipating. Our experts told us that we would have an obligation of, 375 units or something like that. And when the courts finally made their decision, it came in at 753 units of affordable housing that we would have to provide in the third round, which ends in 2025. So very soon, just over the next 4 years. Now, we have some units that we had already built. For instance, we had some affordable housing at Avalon Witherspoon. We have some affordable housing at Merwick Stanworth. There are numbers of developments that have happened over the last 20 years where we had got some affordable units, but there are a lot more that are needed. And so we had to figure out where to build those in a way that would not overly burden the town. And so what we were focusing on is something that is known in the industry as smart growth. And what smart growth means is that you build in locations where people can walk or bike or take transit to access the needs of daily life. And what that means is that you can add a lot of dwelling units without adding a lot of cars to the roadway and overly burdening the infrastructure. And it contributes to the quality of life of the residents of the housing. Another big concern of ours was what we call missing middle housing. So at a time when we're being required by the courts to provide affordable housing, which is subsidized and available only to people with incomes, under about $90,000 annually for a family of four. We're also very concerned about people who are above that income level, but below the $250,000 a year plus that you need an income to be able to afford a single family house, to purchase a single family house in Princeton. So how do we provide housing for that missing middle? And we're looking to do that in a variety of ways. Building more duplexes, townhomes, rental apartments, and things like that missing middle category of residents can afford.
Now that's interesting. Is it, that you feel that you need a middle class as well as a poorer class, and of course the wealthy, but they're there to begin with. Yeah, that's very interesting, David. And you going about it in a very intelligent way.
Thanks. Let me just mention, so the way that we threaded that needle was a lot of the development is happening around the shopping center, because that's a place where people can fulfill their needs of daily life within walking distance. We also have some affordable housing overlay zones encouraging new development along Nassau Street, so in the central business district, which is also obviously a great place for walkability. And then lesser known to people, we created some new zoning in the service district, which is down the hill heading into Montgomery near the Princeton airport. And, you know, a lot of people say, oh, that's not a walkable location, but what we're trying to do is turn it into a walkable location. So the rezoning we did is encouraging mixed use development in that area so that there will be commercial uses on the ground floor that will serve the residents who live on the upper floors. So we're trying to create walkable nodes around the town, not just focus everything in the center of town. Hold on just a sec. I've got someone knocking on my door.
Well, when David returns, we're going to move on to yet another topic. And this one, of course, he and I have had quite a conversation about, and it's called affordable housing. I'm sorry, it's called flooding and stormwater management. And David, I just introduced flooding and stormwater management to our next point.
Thanks, Joan. And I wouldn't have gotten up if I didn't know that this can be edited. This segment can be edited. So I'm relying on Rob to take out the part where I was absent. So flooding and stormwater management, obviously a very high priority for residents of Princeton, especially just in the last month after Tropical Storm Ida came through and created really a level of flooding that we have not seen before in Princeton. You know, we've had other tropical storms, Hurricane Sandy, Irene. You know, this wasn't the first time that Princeton turned into an island where, I don't know if you're aware that this happens, Joan, but when we get flooding like this, there's no way in or out of town.
Right.
Because there are low-lying areas on every side. So, but this time with Ida, we had flooding not only in the usual neighborhoods, but also in neighborhoods that had never seen flooding before. And it's a result of climate change without any doubt. A lot of people don't realize, I mean, if you look at the statistics, our annual rainfall has only increased a small percent. It's about 2 inches over the last 30 or 40 years, which is maybe, you know, a 5% increase. But what's important is not how much rain you get over the course of a year. When you're talking about flooding, it's how much rain you get over the course of 24 hours. And the statistic for that, the increase in the number of extreme storm events that we've had in the Northeast over the last 50 years, it's been over 70% increase in these kinds of extreme storm events. So this is not a questionable phenomenon. There's no question that it's due to climate change. And so it's something that we as a community need to focus on and invest in. I actually like to share, there's a study that was done by the EPA some years ago that indicated that for every dollar you invest in infrastructure to handle climate change, you save $6 in repairs and losses that would occur if you hadn't done the investment. So this is something that pays for itself many times over, but it does have costs. And it's something that we as a community need to wrap our minds around and be prepared to step up to save ourselves money in the long run. And Actually, we were talking before the show about the different things we've been doing in Princeton, but I think I want to talk first about the stormwater, the concept of a stormwater utility, because that's really gets at the question of how you pay for these kinds of investments. So one of the things that we're doing, we're just putting out an RFP, a request for proposals right now, for a consultant to help us study and implement our own stormwater utility in Princeton. And basically what that means is it's a separate entity that implements the investments in stormwater management. And it pays for those investments by levying a fee on each of the property owners in town that is proportional to how much stormwater they contribute to the system. And so I want to explain that a little bit because, you know, right now people pay into general taxes based on sort of the size of their properties and the value of their properties. But that does not have any direct relationship to how much stormwater comes off of their properties, because how much stormwater comes off relates to how much impervious surface there is on your property. So if you have a great big golf course that might be worth a lot of money and might pay high taxes, it might have very little in the way of stormwater runoff because it's all, you know, natural vegetated space. On the other hand, you could have a surface parking lot, you know, that is low, you know, low value. It's not a very valuable piece of property, but is contributing a lot of stormwater to the system. And so this stormwater utility fee structure is based on how much stormwater is going into the system. It's much more fair to the taxpayers to pay for stormwater management in this way. A side benefit is that because these are fees and not taxes, our large tax exempt entities that we have in town would not be exempt from paying the stormwater fees. So we would be getting contributions from the Institute for Advanced Studies or the seminary or Princeton University towards helping to manage our stormwater, which I think is a fairer approach as far as our residents are concerned.
It's interesting, isn't it, that you're addressing current issues such as you know, climate change, but on a very much of a local level, which is what is needed in a situation like this. And you're doing an interesting job. Very thoughtful, David, very thoughtful.
Thanks, Joan. I'm really glad you brought that up because it's one of my favorite points to make. A lot of times people feel so powerless in the face of climate change because if we're just trying to stop climate change, you know, every resident of Princeton could take their carbon emissions level to zero, and it would not be even a drop in the bucket. I mean, it would require enormous changes in our lifestyle. And yet, unless everybody else, not just in the US, but around the world is doing the same thing, it's not going to have the desired effect. But with mitigation, with taking the effects of climate change and planning for them and managing them locally, we really we can make a difference in our lives and our neighbors' lives because the problems that occur can be managed. And I think that in Princeton, we're lucky in a way because we've got enough of a problem that people are motivated to fix it with this flooding, but not such a big problem that it's insoluble. There are other communities in New Jersey, like Manville and Bound Brook, famously, you know, they're low-lying right along major waterways, and they're receiving runoff from dozens, if not hundreds of other communities. And there's nothing they can do. There's, you know, no matter how much they invest, they can't solve the problem. But in Princeton, it is something that we can really, you know, move the dial on on protecting ourselves and mitigating the problem.
Well, that's quite fascinating. We can do something, and we are doing something, both of those things. And
Yeah.
that's an important distinction that you were able to make. You know, where can we help and how can we help? And that's kind of wonderful. What about the program about neighborhood buddy initiatives? You're working on that one, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Joan. So this is, I guess, a more modest proposal, but it's also really related to this whole issue of resiliency and being ready for climate change. And so what the Neighborhood Buddy Initiative is it's trying to pair up residents in the same neighborhood, somebody who has, the ability to help a neighbor with a neighbor who may need help in the event of some kind of an emergency. And this could be anything from a power outage to road closures because of flooding or down trees, even heat related, if there's a heat wave and somebody doesn't have air conditioning in their home, that can be an emergency as well. And so the idea is to pair up individuals who want to help with people who are vulnerable, pair them up within their neighborhoods, because if roads are closed, it's not that much of a help to have somebody, who lives in the Littlebrook section of town paired up with somebody who lives at Elm Court, for instance, because you might not be able to get there during an emergency. So the idea is to pair people up in their neighborhoods and, develop relationship. So the idea is not, I'll get a volunteer and just pair them on a spreadsheet. And when the emergency arrives, the stranger comes knocking on an elderly person's door saying, I'm here to, help you. That's not going to work. People have to have a relationship in order to be trusting. So the idea is to create these buddy pairings and to have the support buddy helping on a regular basis, whether it's bringing in the newspaper, taking the recycling out to the curb when on recycling day, shoveling a walk when it's snowy, just coming for a visit, coming for tea, because loneliness is an issue for some of our shut-in residents as well. And so you build that relationship, and then when there is an emergency, you check in and you make sure, if somebody's on oxygen, are you okay? Or do you need a generator because the power's out, for your oxygen compressor, or whatever the specific need might be. And one of the other things that we're trying to do is for volunteers who want to be a support buddy, to also give them some training. So if they're nervous and feel like, I want to help my neighbors, but I don't know what to do, there's a program called CERT, which is Community Emergency Response Training. And our Director of Emergency Planning, Mike Ye, is committed to offering that training for individuals who feel the need for it. It's not required to be a buddy, but if you want to get that training, that's going to be offered as well to help support the support buddies.
Yeah, these are all wonderful plans that are very much community-based. And that's the interesting part about it, that the community looks to say, how can we help ourselves? How can we help others in our community? And you're doing that at every single level, which I think is just amazing,
Yeah.
and very, very important, especially when we're dealing with these very difficult times, when we're dealing with problems with COVID, when we're dealing with problems of weather. I know during Hurricane Ida, I myself fell and I was alone. And I didn't dare call 911 because the hurricane was on. So I had to wait till the next morning, but I was alone.
Mhm.
And then I called 911 and they were wonderful. They came right away and they took me in an ambulance to a hospital. And the hospital x-rayed every bone in the body and
Mhm.
was very, very pleased to tell me that nothing had broken, but bruised. Oh my God, yes, yes,
Yeah.
very badly. So,
But wouldn't it have been nice if you had had a buddy who you could have called, who could
right.
have come over and even just kept you company, while you were
Yeah,
waiting? Because obviously it was not safe to go out in a car at that time. A buddy would not have been able to do that,
no,
but um, could have helped put ice on it, other things,
right.
other sorts of first aid things that could have been helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, when they were finished with me in the hospital, they left me in the waiting room. And I said, well, I need a ride to get home. How am I going to get home? And they said, well, Princeton is shut down. You know what you just said. I said, but I have to get home. How am I going to get home? I'm going to sleep here all night in this chair. And so this woman pulled out a little card, business card, and it was a taxi service. And she calls the taxi service, and he does come, but he does ask a lot of money.
Right.
And fortunately, I had some money on me. And so he wouldn't move the car. He had his hand like this, put the money in my hand or I don't move the car. And so I put money in his hand. He said, more, more. And so finally,
Sounds a little suspect, but
I know, but you know what
extortion. Yeah.
Joan is saying to herself, he'll get you home. That's what matters. He'll get you home. And
Yeah.
he did. And he did. And so therefore, I wasn't sitting outside the waiting room of a hospital all night long.
Right.
These are things that we can't anticipate. But yet, when they come along, we need help, right? We need to turn to other people and we need help. And what you're saying is, let's build this awareness, this consciousness that we need to care about each other. And how do we do that? And maybe at one time, people did it naturally through their own cultures, for example, but not now. It's not, too many people are too isolated now. So we have to rebuild a culture of caring. How about that? C of C. I just made that up.
So I love that, Joan. And I think, it reminds me a little bit of the talk of a Green New Deal.
Oh, yes.
Right? People
Right.
talk about climate change as an opportunity to reinvent our system, to be more fair, to help not just prevent climate change, but to help economically and to create a more equitable and better functioning system all around. And I think this, I think it's really applicable to this as well, where this is climate change. We know that as a world, we're going to be facing these incredible challenges. Well, maybe that's an opportunity to rebuild the bonds of community that have been frayed and stretched and broken, just by whether it's the Industrial Revolution or the internet, right? People spending too much time staring at their screens.
Right.
For whatever
They should
reason,
stare
I think
at this screen.
Yeah, yes, this screen is fine, but all other screens. Yeah, but we really do need to rebuild that sense of community, and maybe this every what do they say? Every crisis is also an opportunity. So, like
Aren't we? Yes, aren't we lucky to have David Cohen as our councilman and someone who wants to help and knows how to help? You have to have all the components together. And it's that he's clearly focused on our community in a way that we need going further, going forth. We need help, and we must recognize that that's the way life is now. Life has changed. When I'm teaching college sociology, I give the students the assignment to interview their own parents because they've been stuck at home with their parents. And they come back and they say things like, I never knew my parents. I didn't know them. they had never shared with each other. It was amazing to me to say, okay, we were in trouble to begin with. We were getting so isolated from each other that we didn't even know the people we were living with.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's as you say, it's an opportunity to turn things around, to be coming back to being a community in a way that maybe we had in the past, but we don't seem to today, do we?
Right. Right.
Well, David Cohen, councilman, I want to thank you for being the councilman. I want to thank you for contributing in the ways that you do. And thank you again for coming on board to Backstory with Joan Goldstein.
Thank you for having me, Joan. Really wonderful opportunity to connect with our community through your show. So I appreciate it.
I appreciate it too, David. Come back again. We'll do another one. We'll do a follow-up one.
I can keep talking. I could keep talking for a long time if you give me the opportunity.
Well, you had it. You had the opportunity, David. Okay, thank you so much for coming on board to Backstory with Joan Goldstein. Goodbye.
Goodbye.